Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Good Morning Cannabis, and I have a good friend of mine, Steph Sherer. Did I say your name right, Steph?
That's correct.
Oh, good, because sometimes I'm known to butcher a name. And Steph has a pretty long history in the cannabis industry, and she's done some amazing work. And the organization that she represents is an amazing organization. So I have a few questions for her, but Steph, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the organization, and I'll go right into my questions.
Well, thank you, Todd. Thanks for having me. It's always great to reach a new audience. I am the founder and president of Americans for Safe Access. We are a patient-focused organization that is working to create safe and legal access to cannabis for therapeutic use and research. And we started in 2002, yes, 20 years ago, starting this fight. And part of that meant, creating safe access programs, which are we can see those today in the retail shops. Those are sort of the evolution of what we started back then, which basically our mission was to remove patients from the battlefield of the war on drugs and create a safe place that they could access cannabis and that we could at least test it for adulterants and contaminants. And I think from that sort of triage program was born what people now refer to as the cannabis industry. But I'll talk a little bit more as you ask questions. But as you can see, we've definitely come a long way in some aspects. But when I started the organization, I have to say I was a very cocky 25-year-old that thought it was going to take us just a couple years to change federal law, and we still have millions of Americans without safe access. Which is what fuels our mission and our work every day.
So I'll right from the start, I mean, one of the questions that comes to my mind, because it's from previous discussions that we had, when we're looking at the recreational or the adult use market, how has that impacted the medical market or some of the things that you're getting involved in? Has it helped? Has it hindered? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, from an access point of view, on one hand, obviously, the fewer criminal exemptions and barriers for people to be able to access cannabis, the better. And that's just sort of at the lowest sort of definition of access. The reality, though, and something that I definitely did not anticipate, was the adult use market actually gunning for the medical cannabis market, and actually in many of the states working to remove the protections we've created for patients and remove those programs. And so again, we have to remember that the way that medical cannabis patients see these access programs are really as a triage component. It's not, we still have a lot of evolution to do to make sure that cannabis has its place as a known medicine for patients and physicians across the U.S. At that level, I guess it's opened it up a little bit, but we've seen the adult use lobby try to push medical cannabis patients in that market, making them have to pay high taxes, right, and removing some of the other privileges that we fought hard for over the years.
So they can, in some sense, that the adult use recreational market can actually work counter to what you're trying to accomplish. I think I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I think for years, I think a lot of people looked at medical cannabis and said that we were just wolf in sheep's clothing, that we were really just trying to open the door for adult use. And while that was possibly a byproduct of our work, it definitely wasn't our intention. But I also, have had to deal with, for years with people saying, well, if cannabis was just legalized, wouldn't that take care of access for patients? And what we have seen in the various states that have adult use markets is the answer is no. And while, these two consumers, the adult use consumer and the patient, while it's true that their product comes from the same plant, and how the product safety protocols required to safely cultivate and manufacture it are the same, the actual products themselves and how patients get them and how other consumers get them is very different. And so I think what we're looking at now, I think everyone can agree that it's time for the adult use market to go its own way and for the medical cannabis market to be allowed to evolve into medicine, which means passing federal legislation that creates, in our view, an Office of Medical Cannabis and creates a new schedule for cannabis, recognizing its medical benefits.
Got it. So recently, the news, we spoke about this last time we met, the news of what President Biden had spoken about in producing a pardon for certain folks who've been convicted and looking into, I guess, rescheduling cannabis. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it's a testament to how powerful the medical cannabis movement has grown, that someone like Biden, who is very anti-cannabis, has been forced to say something. But I will say it was sort of like releasing the pressure valves, and the statement that Biden made was literally the least he could do. There are very few people that are actually prosecuted and convicted for possession at the federal level, and so that was mostly symbolic. And as far as looking into scheduling, his predecessors, Obama and Trump, both air quote looked into rescheduling. I think the issue is when a president says they're going to look into scheduling, is that the people they're asking are looking within sort of a set of rules. We have to remember cannabis was put in Schedule 1 not through a scientific process, but a political action.
Right.
And so in order for cannabis to move forward, it needs a political action. We need Congress to step up, and we believe that adding a new schedule to the Controlled Substance Act, a Schedule 6, that cannabis and cannabinoids would be put into that schedule and would allow it to be controlled, but we could still remove the criminal penalties from this plant.
Do you think, I guess here's a question for you, Steph, again, I'm curious. Do you think over the past 5 years there's been a lot of progress in this movement, or has it slowed down from when you first started? What are you happy with where things are going? And if not, or even if you are, what else needs to happen, especially as we're speaking about your organization, that would be satisfying your goals?
Yeah, I would say on one hand, we're very far away from our goal of creating safe access for all Americans. I often joke, if we change the name of our organization to Privileged Americans for Safe Access, maybe we would see ourselves as being closer to victory. But the reality is, even in the states where we've passed medical cannabis laws, millions are left out of those programs because of drug testing, because of the cost of the medicine, because of federal employment. There's just so many issues facing patients and doctors who want to utilize cannabis as a treatment option. And so with that in mind, we definitely have a huge mission. And so, we do have to take a breath from time to time and look at the success. We definitely, are happy to see the 38 states with medical cannabis laws, most of the U.S. territories. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we were going to reschedule cannabis at the UN level before we did here in the United States. We're seeing, not just Biden feel like he has to come out and address this issue at some level, But we're also seeing even organizations like NIDA,
Right.
feeling like they've got to step forward somehow and address medical cannabis. Our organization was successful in having the DEA. They've had to remove all of the misinformation about gateway theory and
Right.
about schizophrenia. It's a project we did under the Data Quality Act. But so, we definitely have done a lot. We now see we had worked with the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia to create a cannabis monograph. Now we see USP is starting to draft a monograph. So all of these things are, show progress. But it's really hard to get excited about that progress when you're face to face with a patient in Tennessee who is not able to tell their family about their medication because they're afraid they'll go to jail, or to a patient in New Jersey who is now looking for new housing because she's been kicked out of Section 8 housing,
Right.
or a grandmother in Colorado who can't travel to see her granddaughter graduate from high school because she can't travel with her medication. And this
Great.
list goes on and on. People who have to watch their loved ones suffer in hospice because the hospice won't let their son or daughter or mother or father use cannabis. So yes, I'm proud of the progress we've made. But the people who are judging me are our members, and who are judging the progress of our organization are members. And those individuals, I think, have a very different view than maybe someone who was just awarded an adult use license in one of the medical cannabis states.
So when I first heard you speak, Steph, I was really impressed with your passion, and you have a different perspective on the industry than other folks I've spoken to. That's why I definitely wanted to do this interview. But I guess the question I would have is, what are some of the things that what are some of the things that your organization needs right now? I mean, obviously every not-for-profit needs funding, but are there other things that you need, or as the CEO of the organization, or that the organization needs?
Yes, of course, funding. We also, just becoming obviously large checks are good, but we also, need members. Just
Right.
signing up for a $35 membership, will keep you informed of what's going on around the country. But I would also, I think for your audience, for people that are maybe a part of the cannabis industry, I would invite them to look around, look around themselves, look at look at who's at the table, who are they inviting to the table to talk about these issues. And if they're in a legislative meeting, if they're looking at a business plan and they realize that there isn't a patient perspective or a patient representative, then they have the opportunity to create space for that voice. And so, I think it's important. While yes, it's pretty interesting, the potential projections of cannabis as an intoxicant. I also want to remind people that cannabis also has the ability to replace, Advil, Tylenol,
Right.
and can really be a significant medication in this country. And if you're looking at the short-sighted marketplace of just wanting, people who like alcohol, if you really want to fight with that market of selling people cannabis for intoxicants, that's one side of things. But I represent, a perspective of people who need cannabis and need to take it every day, 3 to 4 times a day.
Right.
And I guarantee you, we're a much better customer base than people that might want to enhance their experience at a concert.
Fully agreed. It was interesting. I was meeting with with a young woman the other day, with one of my partners, and she shared the story of how her mother had very, I guess, advanced level of MS, even to the point
Mm-hmm.
where her hands and her feet were beginning to turn in, like, to that degree. And she was under, I guess it was 5 different medications that the doctors were treating her with for that. They actually introduced cannabis into her diet, through cannabutter. I don't know where they were getting the cannabis from, honestly, but since they've been doing that over the past 6 months, she no longer needs 4 out of the 5 medications. So and when I go around the country and I speak to people about this, there are so many people have told me that cannabis has either saved their life or the life of their loved ones, including their kids. And I know that you had, your own experience, or you do, with cannabis. Maybe you can share with everyone how you got into the cannabis industry.
Yes, I can. When I was in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with dystonia,
Okay.
and I was prescribed higher levels of anti-inflammatories. And this is actually a very common in the American population, but actually 1 out of 100,000 people cannot process, their kidneys cannot process the anti-inflammatories that are on the market today.
Right.
And so I was in San Diego. My doctor, who was in his 80s, one day came in, closed the door behind him, and he asked me if I smoked pot. And I told him I didn't, and he asked me if I knew where to get some. And I asked him if I was his youngest patient, because I thought he was trying to score cannabis for me, or wanted me to go get cannabis for him. And he realized what I was thinking, and dissuaded that thought. And he said, "Look, I don't really know anything about it, but I know I have a couple other patients that have had intolerances to anti-inflammatories that have found success with cannabis. And you're about 6 months from dialysis. So
Wow.
your choice is stay on these medications, go through dialysis, stop taking the medication and be bedridden, or let's try cannabis." And I had a background in politics, and so when at first I was relieved, that this was working and I wasn't going to lose my kidneys. But then I was actually pretty upset that my doctor had waited for me to get so sick to tell me about this. And as I started looking into, the intolerance to anti-inflammatories, I found that this is, a huge issue for Americans. Like, if you look at even Advil, the bottle of Advil tells you not to take it more than 3 days in a row.
Yeah.
And so, so I found some people in the Bay Area that were doing underground dispensaries, and met them and realized that they had a huge target on their back because of the Bush administration. But I also realized that these people were willing to commit federal civil disobediences, which, by the way, every single person in the cannabis industry today is waking up every day committing federal civil disobediences, because we haven't changed the federal law, as much as their consultants may want to tell them differently. But and as you and I were discussing before, 98% of drug cases in this country are pled out. And so there really isn't an opportunity for this country to see what these drug laws are doing. And so, when I realized that these people were really willing to take on this risk of 40 years in prison, I committed to creating a movement to support them, and to keep them safe. And so, on one side, we created this national movement. Every time there was a raid, there were protests. The media had to look at every single one of those. We had patients for them to interview, but we also trained the people in those facilities not to cooperate. To choose to remain silent and only speak to their lawyer. And that's why we saw so few prosecutions. Is that we were organized and prepared, and that this was, we brought something out of the darkness and into the light. And so now what we really need to do, and I know that everyone in this country knows someone that cannabis has helped, and maybe it only helped them for a little while because, the patient couldn't find the same product, or maybe they moved, or maybe they got a job that wouldn't allow them to use cannabis. And so, for people who see that, don't shrug your shoulders and say, "Oh, well." I want you to know that there is still a movement fighting, to evolve this sort of compassionate use, state-by-state program into a federal program that will allow patients to access cannabis the same way they access any of their other medications, and have the same protections in their life, whether it's their job, their home, or with their children, than anyone else.
I love it. So, Steph, how could people find you and find the organization if they wanted to learn more or get involved or become a member, which I encourage everyone to do who is in the cannabis space to promote this movement? Where can they find you?
It's pretty easy. You can find us at safeaccessnow.org. Again, that's safeaccessnow.org. And the donate button is right on the front. Become a member. We also have a conference coming up in DC,
Cool.
December 11th through 14th. It'll actually be, we're celebrating our 20-year anniversary at this conference, and it'll be our 10th DC conference. And our conference are patient-centric. For anyone who comes to our conference, we set up a meeting with your senators and your member of Congress. And it's a very special event. And so you can also find that information on our website, safeaccessnow.org.
Love it. So, Steph, thanks for being a guest on this podcast. And as I spoke to you before, I want to have you on a few times over the next year as things evolve. But you've been very insightful, and I just want to thank you for being part of it.
Well, thank you for having me, Pat. I really appreciate it.
And enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
You too.
Take care.